Come gather round, let joy sing out today. Dawn now is breaking, and the mountains say, it's only light can make the darkness run. Lift up your head, greet the rising sun. Greet the rising sun. Some people think to harvest happiness by weeding troubles, easing every stress. The trouble is that troubles never end. Get rid of one, and you face its friend. And you face its friend. It's in your heart. The songs of joy resound. You'll hear the echoes in the world around. Wind on a hill sounds lonely if you're sad, free if you're free, cheerful if you're glad. Cheerful if you're glad. Friends, come with me. We'll chant of battles won, shouts not of anger. Joy will be our gun. Before the light, the veils of sorrow rend. In inner freedom, all delusions end. All delusions end.
Good morning. I'd like to welcome all our visitors and the community members and the guests and everyone else who is here this morning to our Sunday service. We have some seats up here in front. Please come. My name is Maria. This is my husband, David. It's our great, great joy to be here with you this morning. I'd like to welcome especially our guests at the Expanding Light Retreat and those of you who are taking the yoga teacher training course or perhaps have taken the Learn to Meditate course. Congratulations. I will read this morning from the book Rays of the One Light by Swami Kriyananda. These are parallel passages from the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Our topic this morning is very dear to all of our hearts: reincarnation, the spiral staircase. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. In the book of Revelation, chapter 3, Jesus Christ tells us, "Him that overcometh will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out." There is a difference between church dogmas, which are based on reasoned deductions from scriptural statements, and the pronouncements of wisdom, which are based on the inner realization of scriptural truths. Reason, like a train, can only follow already existing tracks of human experience. Human memory, being short, is seldom able to cross back over the threshold of a person's present existence. Biblical references to previous lifetimes on earth are overlooked in the deductive process, and we find them therefore excluded from the body of official dogma. Nevertheless, such references exist. The Bible itself presents them, as does Jesus in this passage, not as abstract teaching, but as direct, personal perception of truth. In the same way, Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita silences Arjuna's reasonable doubts on the subject, not by reasoned argument, but by the frank statement contained in the 4th chapter of that great scripture. Arjuna, you and I have passed through many births. I know all of them, though you, O chastiser of foes, recall them not. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
I'd also like to welcome everyone. We'll have a reading now from Whispers from Eternity by Paramhansa Yogananda. I will be thine always. I may go far, farther than the farthest star, but I will be thine always. Devotees may come, devotees may go, but I will be thine always. I may bound over billows of many lives, under sad dark skies of loneliness, but I will be thine always. The whole world may ignore thee, engrossed as it is in thy gifts of money, power, and pleasure, mere playthings, but I will be thine always. Take everything from me if thou willst, but Lord, I will be thine always. Death, disease, and every imaginable trial may riddle and rend me, yet, while the embers of memory still flicker, look into my dying eyes. They will mutely say, I will be thine always. My voice may grow feeble, fail and forsake me, and yet with bursting heart, and with the silent voice of my soul, I will ever whisper to thee, my Lord, I am thine always. This topic today, reincarnation, is a very mysterious one in some ways. Yogananda said that by the time we come onto the spiritual path, we perhaps have spent 1,000,000 lifetimes or more, millions of lifetimes. And yet we hear people, and some of us get so excited when a psychic tells us about 1 lifetime or 2 lifetimes, and there have been millions of them, yet it's so mysterious because we can't remember them all. Yogananda said it's kept from us so that we don't identify with this little ego, we don't identify with our mistakes. We get a fresh start every time. But yet we get little glimpses of this every now and then just to reinforce this truth of reincarnation. I have just gotten back from a lot of traveling in the last several weeks on the East Coast, and I just was down in Venezuela and Mexico with Anashani doing Kriya Yoga initiations and many classes and talks. And we heard a very, very interesting story while we were down there. It was a woman in Venezuela who came to the Kriya initiation. And for those who don't know, Kriya is the highest technique that we practice on our spiritual path here, given to us by Yogananda. And the technique is given through an initiation. And she came and received Kriya. And her parents were Kriya yogis on this path, and her grandparents were Kriya yogis on this path. And her grandchild came to a baptism that Sunday. So there's 5 generations involved with this path. But her story was about the birth of her son. When she was pregnant, a friend of hers was in India and met a Swami in India who said, back home in Venezuela, you have a friend who's pregnant. And this child that she's going to have was my disciple in a past lifetime. And his name was Ganesh. And he's going to be born on this day, on this hour. And so the friend went back. He also said something else. He said, but in this lifetime, we're not going to be together again. But next lifetime, we will be. So the friend went back and told her friend this kind of outrageous story, what the Swami had said. And the friend just couldn't believe it because, for one thing, that day and that hour would have meant that she was going to be 5 or 6 weeks premature with the birth. But sure enough, that day, that hour, and she gave birth to a boy, which, of course, by then she named Ganesh. And we got to meet Ganesh there in Venezuela. And when he was 6 years old, he really wanted to meet his guru from the past life. And so he wrote a letter to him, and the letter came back unopened with a note saying that he had just passed away. And of course, they weren't to meet in this life, but next lifetime he promised. And you have to, at this point, believe that next lifetime, yeah, they will be together. But we get little glimpses of reincarnation here and there to affirm that we have been around the block many, many, many times. And we don't always remember, but the soul really does remember. This is why Swami Kriyananda has pointed out that a soul that has gone through many lifetimes and has suffered many times and learned all the falsities of this world and putting all their eggs in the basket of this world, that he says sometimes just takes a little bit of suffering early on in their life to send them very quickly to the spiritual path, because the soul remembers all these past lifetimes and just takes that little touch to say, yes, it's time to seek God and get out of this world of delusion, which is really what the Hindu teachings teach us. In my travels, I realized that reincarnation in many ways has some similarities to repeatedly flying on airplanes, which I've been doing over and over again. I counted 13 different airline flights in the last 6 weeks that I've been on, counting all these different legs and overnight flights and long lines. And if you look at a young child who's on an airplane for the very first time, they're all excited. They look out the window and they're running up and down the aisles and they try to get a look inside where the pilot is, and it's all very, very new and exciting to them. And maybe this lasts for several times, 5, 10, 20 times. And after a while, it starts to get a little bit old. And we start noticing the seats are kind of uncomfortable. You spend all night trying to find a comfortable way to sleep in an airplane seat, and you just never find it. And the food is not all that great, and the lines are long. And after a while, you start to realize, well, I want to get out. And by the end of the flight, when that line is going up to get out the door, you are quite happy to get out. And the soul remembers this with reincarnation. You'll see souls that are just very new to this whole idea and have done only tens or thousands of lifetimes, and it's still kind of exciting, and they're playing with the playthings of Divine Mother of God and trying out all the things in this world. And then over time, they start to realize, well, there really is not a whole lot here. It's very uncomfortable. There's not fulfillment here. And even though they don't remember all their past lifetimes, the soul really, really recognizes that. And Yogananda said, by the time you are really seriously seeking God, he said, this has been a million lifetimes where you've been doing all of this. And I think probably everyone in this room is a frequent flyer in those reincarnation terms. Because our souls truly and deeply recognize that freedom, joy, happiness, we can try all these things in this world, but we've tried them millions of times before, and we've learned our lesson. And by the time we want divine freedom, what the Hindu teachings, what Yogananda called moksha, which is freedom from all of this, we are really, really ripe. We are very, very ready. And so the teachings of yoga and meditations are given to us to get out of this cycle of reincarnation, of being born again and again and again. Interestingly, some weeks ago when Swami Kriyananda was in America, he was being interviewed, and someone asked him in this interview what was his favorite quote from the Bhagavad Gita. And there are so many incredible quotes from the Bhagavad Gita, but the one that he chose was actually very surprising, because there are many sweet, inspiring, uplifting quotes. The one that he said was the most inspiring for him was when Krishna tells Arjuna, and he says it very powerfully. Yogananda actually uses the same quote in talking about meditation and Kriya Yoga. It's the only quote in this long talk that he gives about Kriya Yoga, where Krishna says to Arjuna, he says, Arjuna, get away from my ocean of suffering and misery. And Yogananda says it very, very powerfully and very, very strongly, saying, don't get caught up in this world. It's very attractive. It will entice us and it will fool us over and over and over again. But the soul knows that we aren't going to find final fulfillment until we find that in God, because that's who and what we really are. It's how we were created. It's our divine birthright. And we know intuitively, every time we try grabbing it with fame or the senses or all these different things, I think we know inside that, oh, this is kind of cheap, what I'm getting here. It's not really the real thing. Until we really start meditating, until we start communing with God, until we start realizing who and what we really are, which is, according to the Hindu teachings, the scriptures, Sat Chit Ananda, ever conscious, ever existing, ever new joy. Yogananda told an interesting story about the whole cycle of reincarnation and what the soul goes through. And it's sort of a tale that he tells, and it's about a person who is living their life. They have a lot of wealth, but they're very unhealthy. And at the end of life, they ask God, it would have been really nice if I could have enjoyed my wealth. I could have also been healthy. And so God gave it to him. Next lifetime, he was healthy and wealthy. But this lifetime, he was lonely. And so at the end of that life, he said, Lord, give me a partner to spend this life with. And so he got a partner, and that lifetime, but she died early, and he had the rest of his life by himself. And so again, time for reincarnation, time to pray, and said, Lord, let her live a long time this time. So he got his wish, and unfortunately for him, because she wasn't the best person for him to be married to, and she was unkind to him, to put it mildly, over the course of the life. And this went on and on and on, incarnation after incarnation. And finally, the soul, this individual, woke up and said, Lord, I want only you next lifetime. I don't care what the outer circumstances are. I want only you. And his wish was finally fulfilled. And we are continually fooled, thinking that if I only get this part right, if I only can be healthy, if I can only fix this karma, but there's always going to be a fly in the ointment. Yogananda said something very interesting, because very often people think it's my karma keeping me from God. If only I'd come on the spiritual path early in my life, or if I didn't have these responsibilities, then I could really seek God. Yogananda said this is wrong. He said that's a cop-out in a way. He said our job is to seek God, practice meditation, offering ourselves into the light, no matter what circumstances we find ourselves in. If we can do that, Yogananda said, God will take care of your karma. That's not our job. Our job is to offer ourselves into the light of God. Recently, Swami Kriyananda, just on Friday, it was a very sort of a momentous occasion in Ananda's history, where he created a new order, a new renunciate order, a new Swami order called the Naya Swami order. Naya means new. And it's a new order of renunciation based not on the old ways of outer renunciation, but of renouncing the ego, of inner renunciation. And it's a very, very powerful and important teaching to understand, is that we don't find freedom by what we do outside. You don't have to change your job, you don't have to leave your home, you don't have to do anything except renounce your ego. And it's in the renouncing of the ego and this bondage to the ego that we become free. The way that Swamiji put it is that in the old Kali Yuga and the old Dark Ages, people didn't understand subtleties of things like the ego. And the only way of renunciation was to renounce the world and all the things of it, and put a wall around yourself and barricade yourself and pray and protect yourself in that way. But nowadays we understand that truth is more subtle than that. We understand energy. We understand that bondage comes from this ego. The way that Swami Kriyananda put it once in a Kriya initiation, it's a very good image. he said that our job isn't to become perfect, to be healthy, and to have the perfect relationship and perfect jobs and success and all of those things that this particular soul I was mentioning was seeking, and I think that we all seek at various times. Our job is very simple. It's to, as he put it, to untie the soul's bondage, which is tied to the post of ego. And so the soul is bound by identifying with the ego, and this rope is binding us to this post of ego. And it's very, very simple. As Swami put it in his talk that he gave on Friday as part of this new renunciate order, is that we don't suppress the ego, we don't kill the ego, we transcend and transmute the ego by offering it to God. And the more we do that in big ways and in little ways, we start to loosen that rope that's tying the soul and binding us to that post of ego. There are many ways we do this. We do it through meditation, where we identify with the infinite rather than with this little self. We do it through service to others, by not thinking of ourselves first, but by thinking of others first. In a way, the ego actually, rather than becoming smaller, expands and merges into infinity and becomes one with the infinite. We do it by not reacting when people insult us and when things happen to us that seem so unfair. As a friend of mine was preaching to his children one time who were complaining about how unfair life is, he just very sort of, perhaps a little harshly and hardly, but very realistically, he said, fair in life is only an accident. Get used to it and get over this idea that everything has to be fair. And the more and more that we can let go of the ego and this little self and not overreact and offer ourselves into the light of God, into the service of God, the freer we will become. And then the karma will take care of itself. God will take care of that. Yogananda said that the goal of the spiritual path is moksha, or divine inner freedom. And he taught that it's not freedom from karma, it's freedom from the bondage of this soul tied to this post of ego. And so don't identify with this little self. There's a very interesting story that Swami Kriyananda talks about in his book, The New Path, where Yogananda sent him to be with someone, a disciple of his, who was in his last days. He was in the hospital. And Swami Kriyananda went and visited him. And he went back to Yogananda later, and the master asked him about how this person was. And Swami Kriyananda said, well, he was talking about all the regrets that he had in this life. And Yogananda's response was, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. He shouldn't have been saying those things. And the implication was that, and Swami Kriyananda talks about this, and Yogananda very frequently talked about it. He said, even to the very end of our life, we can become free if we renounce identification with the little self. And he said, don't have those regrets at the end of your life of what you could have done, should have done. And you can also live your entire life this way. Don't ever have regrets, small or large. Give everything to God. When we can give the good that we've done, the mistakes that we've made, everything going to God, we start identifying with God and not with this little self. That is the way of divine freedom. Yogananda said that someone who becomes free in that way and unbinds those chains that are tying the soul to this little ego, he said they become a jivan mukta, is the way he put it. He said they still have karma to work out, they still have stuff that they have to go through, but because the soul is no longer identifying with this little self, anything can happen to us, and all we feel is freedom and divine bliss. Because when we cut those chains and identify with the soul, we recognize our true nature, which is Sat Chit Ananda, ever conscious, ever existing, ever new bliss. So no matter where we are, whether we are a Swami wearing an orange robe, whether we're raising a family, whether we have a job, whatever our circumstances, whatever our karma, we can become free through the practices that Yogananda, the masters of India, have brought to us, through daily meditation, through service, through letting go of all our good and bad, offering them up to God, through not reacting to all the insults that life and karma hurl at us. When we can become free inwardly, inside, you can be free no matter where you are. So for people living here, for guests, taking these things home with you, Take this thought of divine inner freedom with you. Take this identification with the soul, with divine joy, with divine bliss. At Ananda, the name and the very name Ananda means divine joy and divine bliss. And you see that people here tend to be very, very joyful. And I like to tell people it's not something in the water that we drink. It's in the daily practices that we do, all these things I've been talking about. The more and more that you chip away at this through meditation, through service, all these different things that we've been saying, the freer you become inside, the more you identify with your true self, which is divine bliss, which is God, the less you are bound to this little ego. You will find that if you dedicate your life to this in large ways and in little ways, you will become freer and freer, and you won't have to take a million more plane trips in this body. You won't have to reincarnate again and again. And even if you do, Yogananda said, you're so free inside that these things don't matter, and you work out your karma very quickly and become free. So again, our job is to break that identification with the ego, offer ourselves into the light, and you'll become freer and feel this divine bliss that is our true nature. So blessings and joy.